So this is my presentation on rules and regulations. It's not my intention for you to get bogged down digging through all of the various rules and regs, but you'll at least want to be familiar with where you can find them. If you're ever employed to work on a vessel, you may find you'll have to dig through the rules and regulations to make sure you're legal. Some of my personal experience came from preparing for exams, license exams administered by the United States Coast Guard. And in those exams, the Coast Guard requires that the mariners have an understanding as to how to navigate through the rules and regulations. So when you're in the exam room and you're given a limited amount of time, you'll get questions asking specific, such as what size of a throw line do you need to have on your life ring? How high do your lifelines need to be? And if you're not familiar with navigating through the rules and regulations, you'll end up getting bogged down looking for the answer for the whole allotted time you have to take your exam. So they actually have copies of Code of Federal Regulations and the United States Code in the exam room that you're allowed to use. So it may seem easy that it's open book, but when you start digging through all of those regulations, you can really burn up a lot of time if you're not familiar with how to navigate. But my intention isn't for you to have to learn how to navigate the rules and regulations. It's just so you can begin to be familiar with where to look if you're ever in the situation that you have to look something up. So, yeah, most of my experience in learning how to navigate rules and regulations came from just working on different vessels and participating in Coast Guard inspections and whatnot. Also, being partial to a lot of vessel refits or rebuilds where we had to make sure that the work being done was going to be compliant with the regulations. So there have been times in the past where the Coast Guard has required or asked that we make changes, and because I was able to look up the actual regulations, I found that there were times when the Coast Guard had been mistaken, and if we hadn't have done our homework in looking up those regulations, we would have been stuck with making changes that otherwise weren't required. So the Coast Guard, they're very knowledgeable of the regulations, but being that they're humans, they're not always perfect. So sometimes it's good for you to do the legwork as well, just to question whether or not what they're asking you to do is necessary. Also, it's just a good way to find out whether or not the way you are operating is legal. There have been times when the owner of the vessel has asked me to do certain things, and as far as carrying people that a number of people that I wasn't sure we were illegally allowed to do, so I had to do some homework and dig through the regulations to find out what those parameters were to make sure that I wasn't going to get in trouble with the Coast Guard or possibly lose my license. And I also want to make sure that if I was telling the owner of the vessel, no, we cannot do that, I wanted to make sure I was right, just to make sure that I was giving proper services to the owner. Now, for this program, I'm only going to concentrate on federal law, but in many cases, state laws apply. But assuming that you will probably be working on vessels in federal waterways, the federal law is going to be the one that you'll want to concentrate on the most. But not saying that you should ignore the state law, but it's hard to say what state you might end up working in, so just be aware that there's state laws that you may have to look into. But for this program, I'm just gonna concentrate on the federal. Now, one thing I can say is that a lot of times, if you're compliant with the federal regulations, you're more than likely going to be compliant with most state regulations. However, there are a couple little things here and there that the state regulators could ding you on. I have gotten a citation before for not having registration when I was compliant with all the federal rules and regulations, but not the state. So we did get a ticket under the circumstance, and that was because I was not familiar with the state laws. Okay, so the laws and regulations that you'll need to look up are contained in the United States Code and the Code of Federal Regulations. Okay, so I can explain the difference between the two best as I can. Um, United States Code. So the United States Code, that's basically where the actual law is written, and many laws were written by Congress and passed through the legislative process are categorized in the U.S. Code. So Congress, through law, mandates the executive branch agencies to promulgate the law. So to try to put that into layman's terms, so Congress makes a law, and since Congress is made up of a bunch of political figures and not necessarily mariners, farmers, engineers, pilots, and etc., they leave all of the details of the laws to be worked out by the experts in the respected fields affected by the law. So these details that they leave to be worked out by the experts are what we call regulations, and they are contained in the Code of Federal Regulations. So it contains all the details regulating United States industry. And being that the maritime industry is part of that, details everything regarding vessel construction, required equipment, personnel requirements, and operational procedures. Now, there is a lot of leeway that's left for the mariner's judgment, but the regulations provide the boundaries. So just going back to try to explain this a little bit better in layman's terms, if you imagine that Congress makes a law saying, and that law says that you must operate a safe vessel, well, you're going to ask, what does the law mean by safe? And so Congress says, well, we're going to leave it up to the executive agencies, which are the experts in each field. Agencies like the Federal Maritime Commission or the United States Coast Guard, they're going to leave it up to them to figure out through engineering, research, historical analysis, what is safe. And then they write it all up and give us these regulations. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I'm going to take you on a little trip through the rules and regulations. Now, most of the rules and regulations are posted online, so that makes it very convenient. When I first started working, starting to learn rules and regulations, I had to go to a library and sit at a desk with books upon books of regulations and have to try to filter through all of them. So now you can do it from the comfort of your own living room or any place that you have your computer with you. Okay, so let's imagine we have a small uninspected research vessel and we need to find out if life vests are needed or even what kind of life vests we need to have. Okay, so I'm thinking I'm going to go to the United States Code because I figure there's probably a law that determines whether or not I'm compliant. So I'm going to the U.S. Code. So I'm typing with one hand. So you just can do a search for the U.S. Code on Google, and we'll see what comes up. Okay, so we have U.S. Code. Now here's the U.S. Code, and it's put out by, it looks like Cornell University, or it's law.cornell.edu, and you can go there. But this is the actual government website here, the U.S. Code. So here we are. This is United States Code. So we're going to go down here to the year. And since I want to make sure that I'm compliant with the most recent law, I don't care whether or not I'm compliant with 1994 law, I'm going down to 2011. So 2011 is the most recent U.S. Code published on the website. So I hit go, and up comes all of the United States Code. So these are all the laws contained in the United States Code. So they're arranged in titles, and we're going to go down to Title 46, Shipping. So if you're going to be working in the maritime industry, this is number that you're going to become familiar with. Title 46, shipping. Another one is up here, Title 33, navigation and navigable waters. So Title 33 and Title 46, those are the ones that you'll become familiar with. So I'm going to click on shipping, and it's going to break up into several more categories. Okay, so going through, we got general, vessels and seamen, maritime liability, regulations of ocean shipping, merchant marine, clearance, tonnage, taxes and duties, security and drug enforcement, miscellaneous. Okay, now we're looking for whether or not life jackets are required and what kind. Now, I know it doesn't specifically say, so sometimes this is where you can spend a lot of time because you end up clicking through all of these trying to find it. Okay, because I've had personal experience, I'm going to guess it's in vessels and seamen. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to expand again. Okay, so we got general provisions, inspection and regulation of vessels. Okay, that's starting to get closer to the topic that we want. Okay, so we got load lines of vessels, marine casualties, merchant seaman licenses, manning of vessels, so on and so forth. Okay, so looking at all these topics, I think probably inspection and regulation of vessels is probably the closest to what we want. So I'll click on that, and it expands even further. Okay, let's see. We got general management of vessels, inspection generally, carriage of passengers, carriage of liquids, repealed uninspected vessels generally. Okay, now remember I said we're looking at whether or not we need life jackets on an uninspected vessel. Okay, we have an uninspected research vessel is what we're going to say. It could be somewhat a small skiff. Okay, so being that it's uninspected, sometimes it brings into question, well, we're not going to be required to have what a lot of inspected vessels have, so are we required to have anything because we're uninspected? Okay, so we're going to find out. So here's uninspected vessels, and once again, I'll click on that, and let's see what comes up. Okay, we have application, safety equipment, exemptions, and repealed publications, uninspected passenger vessels, penalties. Well, we're not going to be operating a passenger vessel. So safety equipment, I think a life jacket kind of sounds like safety equipment. So we'll go over here, and there's a PDF file that I can click. There's also text, but I like the PDF. So all of a sudden I have my PDF file come up. So I expand it. And let's see, I go down. Basically what they've done is copied down pages out of the actual printed text. So it says here, each uninspected vessel prepared by machinery shall be provided with the number, type, and size. Oh, that's fire extinguishers. So let's go down. The Secretary shall prescribe regulations requiring the installation, maintenance, and use of life preservers and other life-saving devices for individuals on board uninspected vessels. Okay, now notice at the beginning of that, it said, the Secretary shall prescribe regulations requiring the installation, maintenance, and use of life preservers and other life-saving devices for individuals on board uninspected vessels. So I'm going to highlight that so you can see that. There's where I'm reading, and it's under safety equipment. So I read it here, and then because it gets chopped off onto the next page, here's where I'm reading that. Okay, so it says the Secretary shall prescribe regulations. Now, if you remember, I told you how the U.S. Code works. Okay, it's the law, and this is basically what was written by Congress. And so what they're saying is the Secretary, that's basically the head of the executive administration. So which secretary it is, I'm not sure. It could be in the Department of Transportation, Maritime Transportation Commission. There's a number of places it could be. And so anyway, that being said, that shows that the law requires the use of life preservers, but it says it's going to be contained, the details of that law are going to be contained in the CFRs. Okay, so we're done with the U.S. Code. I'm going to close that, open up a new window, go to Google. Now, since we're looking for a regulation, we're looking in the CFRs, the Code of Federal Regulations. So you can actually do a search. Now, I like to look for what they call the electronic CFRs. There's other types of CFRs, or the CFRs are put online in another format, but my favorite is the electronic CFR. I find that that's the easiest to navigate through. So I just put eCFR. You can write out electronic CFR, hit Google search, and look at right here, Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. So I click on that, and here's the website for the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. Okay. Now, this is going to tell us, hopefully, what kind of life jackets we need and perhaps how many. Now, of course, you say, yeah, life jackets are required. Well, it can't be just any old life jacket. So I'll explain that in a little bit. So now the one nice thing about the organization of the United States Code and the CFRs is if it's Title 46 in the U.S. Code, the CFRs is also Title 46. So it was Title 46 in U.S. Code. It was shipping. So here it is, the same thing. If we go up to Title 33, navigation and navigable waters. So these regulations under this title corresponds to the title of the United States Code where the law is contained that corresponds to these regulations. So we're going to go to shipping again. Click on shipping, and I'm going to go. Okay. Now, again, here we are once again in the whole mystery maze of United States regulations. So you can see we got all these numbers, but all it says here is regulatory entity, Coast Guard, Department of Homeland Security. That's it. You know, we don't see anything about life jackets. So this is where you can eat up a lot of time. You can go and click through every one of these looking for your answer. So if you eventually become familiar with the Code of Federal Regulations, you can find it a bit quicker. So here we are. We're going to go through, start at the beginning, 1 through 40. I click on that. Okay, Subchapter A, procedures applicable to the public. Subchapter B, merchant marine officers and seamen. Subchapter C, uninspected vessels. That kind of sounds like us. So here we are under requirements. I would think if life jackets, I would think that seeing that they were required, life jackets were required under the law in the U.S. Code, I would think that could be requirements. So I'm going to click on this. So here we are, requirements. So and then the subchapters are divided up into parts, which are then divided up into subparts. So here are, the part is requirement, and then subparts, application, navigation lights, explaining what kind of navigation lights we will need on our uninspected vessel. Life preservers and other life-saving equipment. So we go through application, definitions. So if we're unsure what the law means by a specific word, we can look it up under definitions. So I'm going to say life preservers and other life-saving equipment required. And there's also marking and storage and the condition that the life-saving equipment has to be maintained. Personal flotation device lights. So there's a lot of information you see that falls under this. So life preservers and other life-saving equipment required. I'm going to click on that. Okay, here we go. These are all the nitty-gritty details of the Code of Federal Regulations. So it says, under life preservers and other life-saving equipment required, no person may operate a vessel to which this subpart applies unless it meets the requirements of this subpart. Each vessel not carrying passengers for hire less than 40 feet in length must have at least one life preserver, Type 1 PFD, buoyant vest, Type 2 PFD, or marine buoyant device intended to be worn, Type 3 PFD. Approved under Subchapter Q. I'm going to highlight that. Subchapter Q of a suitable size for each person on board. And then it goes on explaining a little bit more. Kapok and fibrous glass life preservers that do not have plastic cover pad inserts are required by subparts 160.062 and 160.005 of this chapter are not acceptable as equipment required by this paragraph. Okay, so this is this subchapter Q references where you can find out what type of life preserver you have. So you can't just take an old coat and stuff it full of a bunch of Ziploc bags full of Kleenexes and say, well, this will keep me afloat. This is a life jacket. No, it has to be an approved life jacket. And so approved under subchapter Q. So if we're crazy enough to where we really want to find out what exactly the life jacket is we need, we can go back to our quagmire of subchapters. So subchapter Q. Now where we were here, this is subchapter A, B, C, D. So we just keep going alphabetically through these numbers. So 41 to 69. Oh, subchapter E, load lines, marine engineering. Oh my goodness, all the regulations relating to marine engineering, pressure vessels, piping systems. Oh, it just goes on and on. Subchapter G, documentation, measurement of vessels. So it's not in here. We got to back up. Going here. Now I actually know which one it's in, but I'm going through here just so you can kind of start to see how these things are arranged. Subchapter H, passenger vessels. And as you dig through these, even though it's a real pain in the keister to kind of find or to have to dig through each one, as you successively do this, you start remembering where these things are. So pretty soon you'll get a lot better at it. Cargo and miscellaneous vessels. Oh, mobile offshore drilling units. Electrical engineering tells us what kind of wires we need to have on the boat. You can't just put any type of house wiring on there. It has to be marine wiring. Subchapter K, small passenger vessels, offshore supply vessels. So we're now down to L. Okay, 140 to 145. And dangerous cargoes. Oh, certain bulk dangerous cargoes. Manning of vessels reserved. So they're not telling us what's under manning of vessels. Going back here, subchapter Q, equipment, construction and materials specifications and approval. So this goes through and says if you just, this is basically gives all of the parameters for what constitutes a proper, acceptable, approved life vest. Also, if you want to start a company that's going to manufacture life vests, they have to be manufactured to a specific standard. So if you want to find out what that standard is so your company can make marketable life jackets, you can look up in here: construction, materials, engineering equipment, electrical equipment, life-saving equipment, approval of equipment and materials. So if you develop your new fancy life vest that's going to revolutionize the world of life jackets, you can find out how to get that design approved so it can actually be accepted as an approved life vest. So here we have life-saving equipment. We go there. Life preservers, general scope, general characteristics of life preservers. Life preservers, Kapok, adult, child. So it goes on. You can see all of these details specifying what kind of life jackets you can use on your vessel. Okay, so there's even more details. Not only that, it tells you an acceptable way of repairing a life jacket, buoyant apparatus for merchant vessels, and lifeboat and life rafts. So all of these details are contained in here. So that's the Code of Federal Regulations. I'm going to go back to the United States Code. One of the things that's also contained in the law, and which is in the U.S. Code, are penalties. So basically what happens if you're not good about following the rules. So I'm going to use one example. I kind of find it a little humorous because I think this has been on the books for a long time, but it has in here some of the penalties for breaking the law. Okay, so subtitle 2, vessels and seamen. So we'll go into here. And once again, I kind of know where to find this stuff. So going down, we're going to go down to, I think it's in chapter 15. Let's see, measurement, state. It's in, let's see, oh, chapter 115. So it's actually up here. So I'll go over to this PDF. Okay, I'm going to expand it. So you can find the penalties for not, if you want to find out what's going to happen to you if you break a law, you'll have to do some digging to find out what the specific penalty is. But to find out what the penalty is, it's contained in the law, and that's in the United States Code. So we have to scroll down to 115. And this is always, if you're ever in command of a vessel, if you're a master, this is a good law to read at the beginning of a voyage. And it's still going down to 115, chapter 115, we're 112. So there's 113. Here we are. Penalties for specified offenses. Okay, so it says when a seaman lawfully engaged commits any of the following offenses, the seaman shall be punished as specified. So they have for desertion, for if you have signed on a vessel and then you leave without signing off. And but here's the one for, I'll highlight it, for willful disobedience to a lawful command at sea, the seaman at the discretion of the master may be confined until the disobedience end, and on arrival in port forfeits from the seaman's wages not more than 4 days' pay, or at the discretion of the court may be imprisoned for not more than 1 month. For continued willful disobedience to lawful command or continued willful neglect of duty at sea, the seaman at the discretion of the master may be confined on water and 1,000 calories with full rations every 5th day until the disobedience ends. And on arrival in port forfeits for each 24 hours continuance of the disobedience or neglect not more than 12 days' pay, or at the discretion of the court may be imprisoned for not more than 3 months. So this is a law that basically says that you have to listen to your officers. So you don't want to be disobedient. The only circumstance in which the law is forgiving of disobedience is if your officer is acting in an imprudent manner that's jeopardizing the safety of the vessel and those involved. That, I think they do offer a little bit of lenience, but under normal circumstances, if it's just prudent actions that the officers are demanding and there's willful disobedience, then you could get locked up on your rations. Now, just to sum up, I want to reiterate that I don't expect you to know how to navigate through the rules and regulations at this point. I am not going to ask you any question like what size pipe you need to have on a bilge manifold on a small passenger vessel, so you won't have to look that up. But you should know where to start. So if you're operating in a federal waterway and want to know what is required of your vessel, you should know where to look. And because, non-compliance, the Coast Guard may be forgiving if they know you're trying and it's in your best effort, you're trying to be safe. Or they may not, depending on what kind of boarding officer may come and visit your vessel. Now, if they expect that you have a flippant attitude towards the law, then you better be prepared for some major inconvenience. So, yeah, it's good to know where to begin your search. And you should know that most of the details and requirements of vessels operating on federal waterways are contained in the Code of Federal Regulations. So that's where you got to dig around to find out whether or not your vessel is compliant. And the actual laws and penalties are contained in the United States Code. So those are a couple of the things that you at least want to know, that the regulations are in the CFRs and the laws and penalties are in the U.S. Code. Further reading, if you're interested, there's a few places you can go. If you want to dig around in the CFRs or the United States Code, you can do so just by doing the search like I showed you on this presentation. Also, if you're curious as to if you're curious as to the intricacies of how all of this stuff is organized, you can visit the website listed here, and that kind of gives a good explanation of U.S. Code and Code and Federal Regulations and how they're organized. Also, the United States Coast Guard offers some helpful resources. You can visit their website. You can even, a lot of times, call the sector, the nearest Coast Guard sector, and you could probably find that on their website. You can call them, and a lot of times an inspector will help give you a direction as to where you can find some resources to help make sure that you're compliant. So even though the guys look sometimes intimidating in their blue uniforms, especially if they come speeding up and ask to board your vessel, for the most part, those guys are really interested in just keeping the waterway safe, and they're very appreciative of people who are looking to work with them. So most of my experiences with Coast Guard has been extremely positive, very professional, and they've always been very helpful in helping me make sure that my vessel is safe and compliant with the regulations.